1 Timothy chapter 6. We read this. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. People who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. And then you skip down a few verses, and he finishes with this. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of all the life that is truly life. So Paul is saying quite a bit there. I've heard you talk about that as good news and bad news. So unpack that a little bit for us.
Well, the bad news comes in the early part of that passage that you read, Don, where it says, we brought nothing in the world, can't take anything out of it. And by the way, what Jesus was saying is, you can't take it with you. But the corollary is, but you can send it on ahead. And that's storing up treasures in heaven. But what he's talking about here, like in verse 7 or verse 8, if we have food and clothing, we'll be content with that. And then verse 9, here's the bad news about wealth. People who want to get rich fall into. Now, here's the list, and ask yourself, is this what you want? Temptation, a trap, many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. And then it talks about those eager for money have wandered from the faith and have pierced themselves with many griefs. So there's about 10 or 11 things there. And just make a list of those key words. Say, is this what you want? Well, this is the exact opposite of what you want. But if your life is about accumulating wealth, then that literally is what you are destining yourself for. But there's one thing that will break the back of materialism, and that's what we see then later on where you read in verse 17 or in that neighborhood. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, not to put their hope in wealth, which is just full of uncertainty, because you can't hang on to that wealth. Again, you're going to be parted from it. So don't put your hope in wealth. Put your hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. And isn't it great that God says that in the middle of it? It's okay to have stuff, and it's okay to enjoy stuff, right? So this is not asceticism. This is not deny yourself and live in poverty, and that's what he's talking about. No. But then it says, command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds. And that's Ephesians 2 again. And to be generous and willing to share. And in this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves. This is Matthew 6. This is just what we saw Jesus saying. And that's no doubt exactly what Paul's thinking about. Lay up treasures for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is clearly life. But it's not saying, like, what, in the future then, you will finally be able to experience real life. No, if you're storing up for yourselves treasures as a firm foundation for that age, now you take hold of the life that is truly life. Not the life that's an imitation life, that's just the life of materialism. The example that, or an example that I use is like the FedEx guy. So the FedEx guy shows up at my door. Sometimes I give stuff to him to take, and often he's bringing things to me. But suppose I found out that for the last 6 months, the FedEx guy, every time I had given him something, that he had taken it home and kept it. What would my response be? Well, I would confront the FedEx guy, and I would say, What have you been doing? Why have you been keeping that stuff? And then suppose he looked at me and said, well, if you didn't want me to keep that stuff, you shouldn't have given it to me in the first place. To which I would say, you're the FedEx guy. I mean, that's your job. You're supposed to get it to the people that it's intended for. So the question then is, what makes us think that just because God keeps providing money and possessions and stuff for us, what makes us think that we're supposed to keep it? Now, some of it, of course, we keep. We need some to live on. But for many of us, including me, God has entrusted to us far more than what we need to live on. So let's take it and say, God, you're the owner. God is the owner of all things. You know, stewardship begins with recognizing the complete ownership of God. He owns it all. Not just the cattle on 1,000 hills, but everything. The wealth, all of it belongs to him. Everything belongs to him. Then we have the privilege as his stewards of giving it back to him, but we do that through giving to our local church, giving to people in need. And every time we do that, we are also acting not selfishly, but in our own self-interest when we give. You know, holiness and happiness are ultimately inseparable. True holiness and true happiness, because that's when we experience life as God intends it. And that's what this passage is talking about. The bad news and then the good news is exactly what Jesus said, and Paul's saying the same thing. Store up for yourselves treasures in heaven that you will never lose.